This week's lecture is a little bit different because we're going to cover content, the facade development that was done in computer visualization, which you wouldn't have a chance to have that new content because you've already taken the course. So we're going to get a chance to experiment with this project. And that means that I have to develop some lecture content for this week also. And this is going to be the first run through for that. So today we're going to talk about, as I always will at the beginning of the lecture, just general, random, and relevant information, things that stimulated my thinking from the last time we were together, things that might have been in the news that are relevant to our course. Then we're going to review the projects from last week, a great amount of interesting work and also some thought-provoking narratives. So we'll look at the projects and we'll hopefully have a lively discussion about what we've done and where that might go. Then we're going to shift gears and we're going to look at artificial intelligence. Specifically, what's coming on very rapidly is this idea of artificial intelligence to create images from keywords that we might produce. And we'll look at a quick video of that. Now, quick is 13 minutes long. And then after that, we'll talk about AI really and this image generation as it relates to architecture, touch a little bit on the idea of ethics about that. And then I'll review with you some of my AI image search experiences this week, just playing with the toy. And then hopefully toy, the sophisticated tool that it is, maybe is a better way to reference it. And then hopefully we'll have a chance in class to kind of figure out if we can, as a class, use these tools for you to have that same experience. And right now there are some free software available, but the window seems to be closing on that. I think as interest comes up, so if we can find some free work from free software that we can experiment with, we might take some opportunity to do that. So let's get started. Once again, that idea of random things that came up during the week. I saw this facade, a wavy glass facade. It immediately reminded me of a project that we're not doing this semester, but has been offered other semesters, and it's still available on Blackboard. You're welcome to do it if you want. In our case, we use a mesh material and create a wave-like facade, all defined by a Dynamo software. So it's really about computational programming to create a unique facade element. And I'm inspired to reintroduce it to you if you're interested, because it's very similar to what's happening in contemporary architecture. Another theme I wanted to touch on, we talked about last week about what happens at Alfred, how we are a really practical kind of an architectural school. We teach a lot of BIM and Revit, and that becomes a qualifier or a great asset when we're looking at being hired at firms. And I think that that begs when we started this discussion about whether these experiences with BIM pigeonhole us in our employment or future career path. And I wanted to make us conscious about that, kind of really expand on that dialogue as we did last week. But there's some other things that are happening in the architectural world that are really quite germane to that concept. For instance, the New York Times just ran an article that architects in a New York City firm formed their first industry-only private sector union. And, this is hyperlinked. You can click into that. But this idea of architects, as you come into the profession and education, you see it as a really exalted position of leadership, of creativity and experience. But some of the inner workings and practice are really that we are workers. Architects are hired to create documentation, manage projects. And so there is a lot of opportunity for us to, I guess, step back and view what we do as architects, especially in practice. And there's been a lot of concern recently because of kind of the abuse of, I guess, the pay and the working hours of architects to think about better protection. And this is not only architects. Obviously, this cuts across all realms of labor in America today. We have Starbucks, especially some of the fundamental labor organizations of Starbucks has happened right here in Western New York and Buffalo. People realizing that the employer is not going to always necessarily treat the employee in their best interest when other corporate goals are at hand. And so this other article from one of the architectural trade groups, architects must reject the follow your passion narrative, and I'll expand upon that a little bit more in the next slide, and see ourselves as workers. Now, I'm not promoting a labor movement here. I'm just really just trying to introduce you to the idea that this is kind of what's happening in contemporary thinking about architecture and architectural practice, just as it is in contemporary society today. And we're not exempt from it. And so, on that idea of that, as we come back to that phrase, follow your passion narrative, there was a real big brouhaha at SCI-Arc about really the kind of unfair treatment of students becoming interns at SCI-Arc. And there's, if you click through this article, it really kind of points out this idea that because people feel like the profession is a privileged class of people, there's also this opportunity of taking advantage of those. And so in this case, there was some rumblings about faculty abusing the labor resource of students as interns and expecting all kinds of hours and output from them in order to enter the exalted world of architecture. So anyway, I'm presenting this because this is the idea, just to step back from the whole thing, is to see yourself going into practice both as privilege and responsibility, but also seeing yourself as a worker, as a laborer, and how you fit into that scheme and how you want to position yourself in it. And always keep, I guess, a lively and dynamic perspective on that. I started to do some research on collaborating. That was one of the things that was brought up during last lecture, that we would like to do, that maybe we would like to look at the idea of exploring working together and collaborating, which is a great idea. And so I looked at, and this is really only a slide here in the video. We can't have this discussion because it's not a two-way communication. But in lecture, I hope that we'll talk about, I'll introduce the concept of Navisworks if you're not familiar with it, and another piece of software collaboration inside of Revit, and see what our thinking is on what things that we might want to explore. We also might determine that these things are, once again, kind of going to that idea of making us BIM experts and developing expertise. So there's this kind of two hands to the whole thing. One is that the ability for us to work as groups and collaborate is a great and valuable tool for us to learn, just to experience, especially in elevating our ability to be creative as a group. But then there's the kind of basis for a lot of this collaboration software, and that's to make work groups more efficient. And when I say work groups, we get back to that idea of the architect as the worker to create things. And so expertise in this links you to becoming this worker type person. Not to be negative, but these are just two things that are in balance with each other. And then the goal of the educator, of the educational system, the pedagogy of it is, which things are we trying, how do we balance that all out, and then how do we make it content that we can do in the course that's meaningful and useful to us. So those are basically the things that I wanted to touch on. I also want to ask this question. I put this slide in. It's really not that useful in the video, but is anyone interested in VR? I really want to get a gauge of what you might be. And so I guess I should define VR for those of you who aren't familiar with it. That's virtual reality, the idea of putting on a headset and viewing our architecture in a more 3D realistic environment. And I want to judge our interest in that. Last year, I had surprisingly very low interest from the group in VR, and I have some VR equipment I could make available, and we could look at spending some time thinking about that. And so that covers this part of the introduction to the lecture.